Hi there, so welcome to part 2 in this little mini series of dealing with conflict or conflict management or managing conflict in a positive way. So I've decided to put both these together this evening. I'm probably feeling I've missed out the whole week. I haven't posted any videos this week, so I'm probably itching at my feet, or if that's the right word. So tonight we're going to be, the second part, we're going to be looking at how do we deal with conflict. In session 1 we touched on the 5 styles of conflict, and that was the avoidance, accommodating, competing, collaborating and compromising. Those were the 5 styles we looked at, and you can look at that in session 1. Again, say how's it if you're out there, say hi, make any comments you wish, and please share my video or like my page. I like to post anything between 10 or 20 posts a day onto my page, so there's regular updates on my page, so check in there. There's mostly motivational stuff, which is moving in the direction of optimizing individuals. It's one of my passions. So tonight we're going to be chatting a bit about dealing with conflict and these different styles. So we break this down into 5 steps. So step 1 is about it is what it is. And what does this mean, it is what it is? So the problem is the problem. And we cannot solve the problem until we've defined the problem. So until we know what the problem is, and what's extremely important is there in step 4 there, the problem is the problem. The problem is not the person in front of me. The problem is not me. The problem is the problem, and we have to put the problem on the table in order to deal with it. And one of the first things we, certainly as psychologists or a mediator in between two parties, is to make sure that the problem stays the problem and it's not about who's to blame. Because the minute you start blaming someone, solving the problem goes out the window. So then this part about the chicken or the egg, it doesn't matter who comes first. This is like if we just go back to play school times, who pulled the hair first, or if you're trying to resolve a fight between your children, you go, why did you do this? He did it first, she did it first. This is not important. It's not important who did what first, but something's going on and something needs to be resolved, and that's extremely important. A fourth important criteria of it is what it is to understand that we are dealing with a behavior that we don't like, not necessarily the person. And once we start playing the person in an argument and it becomes personal and we start trying to hurt the person rather than trying to fix the behavior, this creates a big problem, because one cannot work with an irresponsible person, but we can work with the irresponsible behavior. Because any behavior is learned, and therefore any behavior can be unlearned. So make sure that we keep behavior separate from the person when we are trying to solve conflict or we're trying to resolve a problem. Then in step 2, sharing is caring. I love this slide where this guy's trying to tell this guy about a whole lot of apples. This picture, the second picture here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but he's telling about apples, and this guy's going banana, banana, banana. He thinks he's talking about bananas. But without being able to communicate, we're not going to get anywhere. And many people struggle with this, and tonight's, maybe that's something for another session to discuss communication and how do we express ourselves. Then we talk about I speak versus you speak. It is extremely important to lead with I feel sad when you speak to me in this manner, rather than saying you make me sad, or you are aggressive, or you are attacking me. Okay, there's a big difference in you are attacking me to I feel attacked when you speak to me in that tone. So this is from assertiveness training, the I speak versus you speak. We've got to be quick. Hi Patrick, thanks. So just Patrick's joined us, so I'm glad he's on. As I said, I always have a chuckle here because it feels like I'm talking to nowhere. I'm used to talking to live audiences, but I have no idea who's on the other side of the camera. So thanks for joining us, Patrick. So what I want to say is, if this I speak versus you speak, if we lead with you, the minute we say you have done something, the other person feels attacked, they feel they have to defend themselves. So it's much better to say I feel attacked when you speak to me like this. So be careful about using I speak. Also, I speak is known as an eye opener, because when we say I feel like this when you do this, it helps the other person to understand how they should act around you. So we're not doing a talk on assertiveness. I'm just introducing you to different conflict management styles. Then, lastly, active listening. Listening is extreme. We touched on this in another series that I've run over the last 3 weeks. Active listening is extremely important. One of the simplest ways to think of active listening is, hi Sean, thanks for joining us. One of the simplest ways of doing active listening is to use the word RIGHT, R-I-G-H-T. RIGHT stands for reflective listening, interpretive listening, good questions, helpful feedback, and tender confrontation. Reflective listening is simply parrot fashion. I think you're a bum. Oh, you called me a bum. Is that correct? And then the person can correct you if you got the word wrong. I chose a nice word for an expletive. So, and then interpretive listening is when you're trying to understand what the person's saying. So the person's jumping up and down there screaming and you're saying, oh, you're very angry. And then they'll say, no, I'm not very angry. I'm actually quite irritated, but not angry. So when you're trying to interpret what they're saying, it also again appears like you're listening, and then that will help them to understand or feel listened and correct you if you're wrong. So don't assume that you know what they're trying to say. Interpretive listening helps you to make sure that you know what they're saying. Then the helpful feedback, the good questions, 4 W's and an H, open-ended questions versus, and I'm scanning through it because I have spoken a little bit at length of this in the previous sessions, but the good questions are 4 W's and an H, what, when, who, where, and how. In Afrikaans it is wat, waar, wanneer, wie, and hoekom. Okay, it doesn't work in Xhosa, I'm afraid, Patrick, so I'm sorry about that. But it certainly works in English and Afrikaans. And an open-ended question is something that's open-ended, so the person can have a whole lot to answer, whereas a closed-ended question would be, do you have a job? Yes. Are you happy in your job? No. So that's a closed-ended question. So open-ended question, these are good questions to encourage the other person to talk a bit more so you can find out more information. Helpful feedback is to give this person constructive feedback, and then T stands for tender confrontation. Yesterday you said this, today you're saying this. It doesn't sound like your stories are matching, rather than saying you are a liar. So it's extremely important to understand communication, and like I said, that's a whole series on itself. Then we have got this thing about look right, look left, and look right again. When we're crossing the road, make sure we know what's coming, and make sure we're not prejudiced by our subjective views. So this is a lovely slide where these guys are all with their one-track minds, very myopic vision, because they're both sitting with this tunnel vision and they can only see what's in front of them unless they're looking right, left, and right again. Something else about, we'll talk about black and white thinking. I think, well, you can, if you wanted, it's in one of the previous sessions, but the black and white thinker often is extremely subjective. They believe they're objective because they're looking at right and wrong, but it's extremely subjective. And when we're looking through our narrow lens, we don't see the whole picture very often. We only see a very narrow version. So make sure you're looking everywhere and you're looking broadly. Then, fact versus opinion. How many times do we argue fact? And I promise you, if you're listening to this broadcast, ask yourself, am I arguing about facts or am I arguing about opinions? I would argue that 99.99% of the time, most arguments are about opinions, which means we shouldn't be wasting our time because the other person has got their own opinion, and I often hear people say, yeah, but I'm entitled to my opinion. You are, but then so is the other person entitled to your opinion. But if you're arguing opinions, you're never going to come to any solution because each person will be arguing for their opinion. The amount of arguments, when I was much younger, I was quite opinionated. That's where the word comes from, and I would like to get into arguments. I loved a good debate, and I didn't mind sitting amongst a whole lot of people that were on the total opposite side of the fence to me, and I would have a nice argument with them. But we were arguing opinions because it wasn't fact. So my count of arguments has come down tremendously because now I'll only argue fact, or I certainly went through a stage where I only argued fact. So one can't argue that this is anything but a pen. We can't say this is a pencil. It's a pen, all right? Now, once you start only arguing for a pen or facts, that also becomes moot to argue, because why would I want to argue with someone who says to me this is a pencil? Because I know it's a pen, it's a fact. So once you start realizing or Because a lot of these talks that I've been leading up to this point have been about mindfulness, becoming conscious, waking up. So once we realize, certainly I must not argue opinions because I'm wasting my time. I'm entitled to my opinion. That person's entitled, but I don't need to argue opinion because we're going to go nowhere. Neither do I need to argue facts, because a fact is a fact. So if I'm going to argue a fact, I'm also wasting my time, because this is clearly a pen and there's no other way to waste my time arguing with someone who thinks it's a pencil. So you will find the need to argue becomes, as I said, it becomes a moot point because it's not going to go there. So often we argue out of egos, and we argue to inflate our egos, and it comes out of a deflated ego place. And then when it comes to right or wrong, or this black and white thinking, who decides what's right or wrong? I once worked with a young lady from a certain culture who had to work with quite a broad team and with a diverse team. And I said to her, and she was struggling with the different viewpoints within her team, clearly. And I said to her the one day, I said, so who decides you're right? Where do you get it from? And she says, well, God, her culture, her neighborhood she lives in, her parents, her family system. That's where she gets her version of right. So I said, okay, fine. And then if we just jump into religion with that, and then the Muslim person, okay, and then the Hindu person, and then the traditional African person, and the Jewish person. So I drew this across a page for her, and I said, so who's right here? And I said, guess what? You are right. I told her, in your channel. And the Jewish person's right, the Muslim person's right, the Hindu person's right, the traditional African person's right. So each of these are right in their channel. So if you're going to lead a team of people, who's to decide who's right or wrong? So be careful who decides this. Again, because it's very subjective. Okay, so look right, look left, and look right again. Maybe just one more perspective on this. They call it the helicopter view. If you think in terms of an H, like when a helicopter landing pad is in the form of an H, they say there's always going to be my view in the one corner of the H. There's going to be your view in the other corner of the H. The bottom left-hand corner of the H would be a third party, a psychologist, or someone that's just standing watching this fight or videotaping the fight. And then the fourth viewpoint, the helicopter viewpoint, is if you took off on the helicopter and watched from above, and you'd be totally, I often use the word ascend. We had to ascend out of the hurricane, above the hurricane. So you're right above the hurricane. You're so far removed from this that you can see a very different perspective on what's going on in this dynamic, this family or this relationship. Which is very hard if you are involved in it, because you're very close to the coalface, so to speak. So it's quite a struggle. Then it takes two to tango. Again, we've touched on this early on in tonight's session. The problem is the problem. Don't play the person. Is it the behavior or the person that I'm not liking here? But it's actually the behavior, and you might be confusing the behavior with the person, or over-identifying the person with that behavior, rather than trying to drill down or focus on that behavior rather. In systems theory, there's a it's called family systems theory. There's an idea called cybernetics, and I don't have a slide to show you, but if you think in terms of an infinity symbol, literally I'm showing you like this infinity symbol. So it works in a system, and if you've got two people in the system, both these people would interact with each other, and whatever anyone does in the system affects the other person in the system. So if you are sitting in the system and there's someone that's irritating you in the system and you believe they're at fault, we try and change that person through power, through control, through all sorts of whatever methods, manipulation, that we'll try and change, and we can't change them. Because and while we are in the system, let me just jump around here. If I had to illustrate it another way, say there was an alcoholic or a drug addict or those are two good ideas. The family would decide that person must go and see the psychologist. However, the family, the system, supports that person in that role and keeps that person in the role. So the typical systems therapist or systems theorist would want to see the whole family, because the system itself is sick if it supports that person and keeps that person in that position. So the basic, if we're talking about conflict or two people fighting, you cannot change this person. But because you are in the same system as them, something about your behavior keeps the other person acting in the way they're acting. And I want to say it almost enables them. All right. So if they keep bullying you, if they keep being abusive to you, if they keep speaking to you in a certain way, it's partly because of your response. So the person either might be having fun with you or really being abusive or being a bully. The only way to change this person, and you are able to do it, this is one of the magic bullets I learned in my few years at Varsity, is that the minute you change yourself and the minute you change your behavior to the other person will change. They have to change because they're part of the system. So we cannot change people overtly by trying to force them to change, but through changing ourselves, through changing our responses to that person and the way we interact with them, we will change them. And this is not to excuse the behavior or to say that you're wrong in order to get a different response. Sometimes if this other person is being abusive to you, it's because you're allowing it. So sometimes you might have to not allow it and leave or do whatever you need to do. But the person's only carrying on because of some response that they're getting from you. It's the same with bullying. Bullying carries on because they get the same response. They're getting a rise out of the person. All right, so remember it takes two to tango. And another one, when you come for therapy, whatever, is to blame. We look at the problem and we focus on that being that. Then this is the extremely difficult part of resolving conflict. Firstly, and I'm going to do, as I said, next week we'll do a whole series on anger and anger management. But why do we get angry? So, and this is tough because people don't want to admit really why they get angry. And firstly, we want to blame the other person for making us angry. And is that fair? Is it the other person that makes us angry, or do we choose to respond with anger? And that's a debate for a whole other day. And because it's not a live audience, I can't get into a discussion with you around that. But a big part of my series has been how we need to take ownership of our emotions. And if we allow someone to make us angry, it's normally because we've got work to do there. But this next thing is, and just, I just want to touch on it here, but we're going to talk about it next week. But when we get angry, anger is a response. Anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is not a primary emotion. Anger is not caused by anger. Anger is caused by a lot of other things. Frustration, irritation, resentment, disrespected. There could be a whole lot of words underneath anger that we're actually feeling, and that makes us respond with anger. Then why do we hold on to anger? Anger gives us power. Anger gives us false power. Anger gives us a false feeling of being better than the other person. Anger, if I drew it once for someone, if I'm this small, anger makes me feel this big. And as long as I'm giving someone a cold shoulder, and the more this person cowers, the bigger I grow, and the more responses more times I'm going to use anger as a response if I see this person whimpering and saying, please don't be angry with me. So we hold on to anger because it gives us a false sense of security. It moves our ego from a deflated ego state to an inflated ego state. That's why we hold on to anger. Then the F word. Why is this F word so difficult to say? And it's not the F word that you think. It's forgiveness. Forgiveness. And why is forgiveness so difficult to say? Because we give away, it feels like we're giving away our power if we do this. So the F word, this word forgiveness, is extremely difficult to say because it means going back from this false sense of my inflated ego, possibly back down to my deflated ego, but I've got to give away a lot of power and authority if I say I forgive you. I often sometimes share with my clients that you don't necessarily have to go. It's great if you can go to the person if it's important to say I forgive you, but often that's not necessary. Perhaps that person's died or it's passed on or the relationship is over, so one can't now go and speak to that person, but we can go and just say to ourselves, I forgive so and so. And what forgiveness does, it releases me. It releases me. It doesn't release the other person, it releases me. It frees me up to go ahead, because if I'm carrying on being angry with the person, I'm wasting a lot of energy trying to keep this person out of my life or to hold on to this resentment for this person. So you need to ask yourself, what is it going to take for you to let it go? Are you prepared to face up to your insecurities? Are you prepared to let your ego come down to where it should be? And that's a hard one for many people to do. So this is why we hold on to anger for so long. So we need to bury the hatchet because it becomes pointless after the argument. Then I want to just touch on these, some healthy attitudes to cultivate. And again, this is not a talk on healthy attitudes, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. I see we're already on 20 minutes. So these healthy attitudes are, I think it's about 9 of them. The first one is non-judging. And I will be running a mindfulness series probably later on in another month or so. But non-judging is extremely important. And this, they talk about openness in mindfulness, to see things as they are, not what we think they are. Because the minute we judge something, we see the person through a lens, so we don't see the person clearly anymore. Okay, we only see the judged version of that person. Then patience. This is a tough one. I want to say, man, I don't know how much patience one must have in some situations. Sometimes we need patience, but we shouldn't wait forever, because I think it's in Buddhism. I don't know if it's one of the attitudes here coming up on the slide, but they talk about non-striving. You cannot keep doing what you've always done, because you're always going to get what you always got. So patience can run out. I'd like to think that we can't always have patience, but we need to make decisions if things are not changing. Then beginner's mind. Beginner's mind ties in with the non-judgmental side. So it's a new day, it's a new time, it's a new moment. The saying is, you cannot put your hand into a river and touch the same water twice, because the water keeps flowing. So beginner's mind is when you wake up next to your partner that you're really struggling with, to try and wake up with a beginner's mind and see them with a fresh set of lenses, which I know is harder than it seems, damn hard in fact. But beginner's mind is something we need to cultivate. We need to try and at least move towards having a beginner's mind, to be excited. It's a new day, and I often think of dogs when it comes to having a beginner's mind. So anyone that's got dogs will know you can shout at your dog, you can smack it for doing something, chewing up my couch like they did with mine, and an hour later that dog comes out and he's his best friend. He's forgotten already that you smacked him for chewing up the couch. So have a beginner's mind. Then trust. Most of us are not very trusting. We don't want to trust, we don't want to let go, we don't want to forgive, we don't want to realize that the person can change, we don't want to give them a blank slate. So trusting is extremely important. And often I have to say to my clients, especially the anxious ones, because they want quick results, they want results now, to trust the process. It's even something I had to do when I first started becoming a psychologist. It was difficult for me to trust the process, to realize there's a journey. But especially anxious clients, they want solutions in the first session, and it's not possible to. Maybe you get a small version of it, but you're not going to get all the answers in the first session. It takes a number of sessions. It's a process. So trust the process. There's this word that we spoke about, non-striving. So stop doing what you've been doing all the time, because do whatever you haven't been doing. So make an exhaustive list of what you've been doing up until this point. Then make another list of everything you haven't done, because there's a whole lot of new things that you haven't done or you haven't tried. And they might feel like there's no ways I'm going to be doing that because this person's being so terrible to me. But possibly if you did that, you might get different results, especially if you haven't tried it. It's like telling a young kid that says, oh, no, I'm not going to eat that. Have a bite. The parent says, have a bite. Just taste it. Don't say you don't like it until you've tried it. So don't say you're not going to hug someone that's called you horrible names the night before. Maybe that person does need a hug. There's a famous religious figure that said we need to love our enemies. And it's also easier said than done, but if we love our enemies, we can make friends of those enemies. Then acceptance. Acceptance is not accepting of the situation. Acceptance is accepting of the emotions that go with the situation, or the thoughts that go with the situation that we're trying to avoid. This is a really tough one. I know part of the 8-week course that I present, it's a whole 2-hour session, and it's one of the toughest sessions, acceptance, because we're constantly trying to get away from situations. We're trying to avoid situations rather than embracing them. But the idea with acceptance is to lean into it rather than leaning away from it, to lean towards it rather than running away from it. Then letting go. This is one of those ones we keep speaking about. I think it's Osho that said, the past doesn't cling to us, we cling to the past, and the minute we let go, the past simply evaporates. So you need to let go. Another great analogy of not letting go or holding on to something is if you consider yourself with a backpack, and I know this is going to sound disgusting, but walking around with a backpack of rotting meat on your back and not putting it down. That's what letting go speaks about, taking off the backpack and putting it down, because you're carrying this smelly, stinky meat around with you, and it's not helpful. And then lastly, compassion. And compassion is not just compassion for the other person, the compassion is compassion for yourself, to give yourself time out, to treat yourself, to love yourself, to turn down that critical voice a bit softer so it's not so loud in your head. You're a loser, you're an idiot, How can you be doing such things? And like I said, the internal critic, we've touched on this in the previous sessions. It's not the inner critic itself, again, that's at fault. It is the nature of the inner critic's judgments, okay, and its evaluations of you that are a problem. Because it's normally extremely negative and it uses a very belligerent tone with you, patronizing tone even sometimes. So be compassionate for others and yourself. And this is also going to help towards building relationships. So, in conclusion, without positive confrontation, there can never be a solution. We don't have to like the person to work with them. I do a lot of company interventions, conflict in companies and in groups, not just family therapy and couples therapy, but in groups, in organizations. And professionally, you don't have to like the other person. You've just got to work with them. Okay. To really go and have a good hard look at yourself and ask, what is my role in this dynamic and how am I contributing to maintaining the system? How am I enabling the person that I'm in conflict with? And I say enabling because of your responses are allowing that person to carry on doing what they've always done and treat you in the same way. And then lastly, just remember that by forgiving, you free yourself. It's like holding onto a kite, and when you cut the kite can go. And I'm free. I no longer have to hold on to the string. I don't have to hold on to this kite. I'm gone. I'm free. And then lastly, just this is a great little slide to end off with. Confrontation does not always bring a solution to the problem, but until you confront the problem, there will not be a solution. There will never be a solution. Right. So thank you very much for joining me. I'm stoked you guys could come. This is the first time I've done an evening presentation. I love doing this. I'm hoping that you're enjoying and getting something from it. So as I said, make some comments in the taper. Share the video if you like. Tell your friends about my Facebook page. And have a lovely evening. And hopefully you're enjoying lockdown and it's not getting you too down. Take care. Take it easy. Cheers.